Who has the first question?
Yeah, I got one since nobody else does. A lot of us intermingle with the Old Order Mennonites and the Amish, and they seem to have a pretty bad taste in their mouth regarding Calvin. What's up? What do you hear?
Did you have a question?
Oh, sorry.
That's what I think it was pretty. Toby's question is: look, we live in this is Berks County. Berks County has an awful lot of German influence, if you will. Well, they're called Pennsylvania Dutch, but they're not Pennsylvania Dutch at all. They're German, really. A lot of Anabaptistic influence, and they just really have a problem with Calvin, and they really have a problem with Luther. In Calvin's Institutes, he had some pretty nasty things to say about the Anabaptists. But you have to remember, and I don't know if they make this distinction, I don't think they do. The reason why I say they don't make the distinction, there were Anabaptists who were basically libertines who set up their own societies, and the first thing they said was, we don't have any law. Well, the first thing that happened, of course, was guess who got all the women? The pastors. And it went downhill from there. These things happened in the Anabaptist circles in Germany and in Austria. And I got to tell you that I don't know if my Anabaptist friends, my Mennonite friends, understand that difference and distinction. I went to a Mennonite school for 8 years, and I learned about Felix Manz and Conrad Grebel, and you Mennonites probably have heard about those men. They were from Zurich, not from Geneva. And I heard about the Anabaptist heroes, and I heard about Martyr's Mirror. Every Mennonite knows about Martyr's Mirror, I think, or almost everyone. But I never heard them make the distinction, never, between the radical, godless Anabaptists and what even Rushdoony has called that strain of Anabaptism, which was Christian. Heard Rushdoony lecturing on this, and he said that the Mennonites were the Christian strain of Anabaptism, whereas the radical basket cases, Munzer and so forth, were anarchists, and they were murderers, quite frankly. And when Calvin and Luther spoke against the Anabaptists, that's really who they had in mind. I don't know if the Mennonites understand that. I sure didn't hear about it from them, having gone to school for 8 years with them. It's a good question. Yes?
Interesting to me that you said that Calvin in Geneva at least had no official city title or position or anything. So what do you credit, like we seem to think you have to be in some kind of political power to make these kinds of, the commerce and all of the influences that he had. How do you credit that? How did he have this influence?
Yeah, a great question. The question, of course, being if Calvin was not a council member or a political official in Geneva, how did he possibly have this kind of influence? I think there's two things to think about. One is the reach of the state is far greater now than it was then. I mean, the state can get it. Think about how the state can get right into your wallet today. Take money right out of your paycheck, and you have nothing to say about that whatsoever. Man, Henry VIII could only dream about something like that. Wow, be able to reach into people's pockets like that. And then through this ghastly thing called inflation, you do the same thing. Through inflation, you can take money right out of people's bank accounts, and without ever even banging down the door. Calvin's influence, I think, consisted in this. He had a conviction that the scriptures were the only way to go, and he had the courage to proclaim it. Think for a minute of a highly successful, though very disappointed missionary, Jonah. Most successful missionary ever, right? One very, very short message, and before you know it, the whole city's in sackcloth and ashes. Wow! I mean, that'd be something to write home to the supporting churches. I don't know how much courage Jonah actually had, but he had a very simple message of a God that was serious about judgment and about their sins against him. I am personally convinced myself, and as I read the New Testament, I see what the things that Paul had to say, and especially the Old Testament prophets. Their message was, you yourself, Mr. whoever you are, pastor, city councilman, businessman, whoever you are, you have a responsibility before God, and He will hold you accountable, and He will punish you if you don't believe in Him. Now, I must say, I would argue that we've almost traded a political, oh, I got to be in politics, and I run for office myself. But if you don't have the courage to preach that message when you're not in politics, I promise you, you're not going to have that courage when you get there. There's just no way. I get a kick out of this particular rabbit trail that we're about to run down. It's a short one, very short. I'll get these messages. Hey, we can't leave the public school because that'll take the salt out of it. We need to win the public school. And so what we're doing then is we are calling for our own children to stand up and say in class what their parents would never say at a PTA or a school board meeting. Never. You show me the parent who has his kid in public school who's going to go right down to the PTA meeting or the school board meeting and say, you know what, Jesus is Lord, the Bible's true, when are we going to start preaching this and teaching this in our public school? That I would really like to see. And yet the kids are going to go and do that in their classroom? Please.
Cut me a break. That never happened.
Calvin had the conviction and the courage to preach it. And to wrap that question up, God did expect through the preaching of His prophets that people would reform. He expected that. They didn't always do it, but He still expected it. And I think He expects us nothing less, as preachers of His gospel, to have the conviction and the courage to preach it. What happens, happens. But we must preach it. And I think that's what Calvin did, again and again. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. You think of Rome for a minute. I mean, do you ever think of what it'd be like to be a Roman Catholic? Wouldn't it be cool to go into those elaborate ornate churches and think you were really worshiping God? I mean, you had the saints all around, the statues, wafers that is really the flesh of Christ or whatever they do, and holy water everywhere, and a priest with that cool double hat thing that he's got walking around and speaking in Latin. Man, I'm really worshiping. And because they thought that there's connection with all that stuff, those images and all that stuff, that somehow brought them closer to God and made them more effective. You know what Calvin did? You know what he did? He took the keys to the door of the church in Geneva and locked it so people couldn't go in during the week. Because he was tired of people going, oh yeah, I'm going to go in the church and be spiritual. He's like, no, get out of here and be spiritual out there. Wow. That was so radical then. I mean, now, okay, whatever. Of course we don't go to church during the week. Well, we're supposed to be out here. Radical. But he got it. He understood. Another thing, just back to wrap that up, I mean, there's just so much there, but today, I got to ask, do we even expect reformation? Or are we laughing at Pastor John's prayer? That'll never happen. Banish corruption from the halls of government? That'll never happen. Do we expect that? Who has the next question? Yes.
Well, when people are talking about reform, people are like, well, what we need to do is do it through the individual or whatever. We don't target a mass. We don't target political anything. We do it through friends and family, people that we know. Did Calvin have a particular target? Was he targeting a certain group, or was he just anyone who hears my voice kind of guy?
Did you hear the question? Was Calvin targeting the church or the family or whatever? Or did he have a broader target? And I believe he had the target of the whole Christian commonwealth. Everything being Christianized. Everything. So his target was the world. Speaking of that, we live in times, I don't know if we've talked about this or not, we live in times where Have you noticed that the whole counsel of God has become the enemy of the gospel? Have you ever noticed that? You know, we're only supposed to preach the gospel. And you, Joel, and other people like you, preaching all that the Bible has to say to kings and so forth, you're getting in the way of the gospel. And my response is, wait a minute, am I not supposed to preach the whole counsel of God? Does the Bible speak to kings? Well, yeah. Well, then preach that. But we live in a time when you're not supposed to preach what the Bible preaches to kings and to society. You've heard it. You know, Paul never, joined a political group, and he never got out there and marched with signs and so forth. True. True. Paul never told any man to stop beating his wife. That means that we should not preach to the family, doesn't it? I mean, what Paul had to say to the family was very pointed, but he didn't get real specific. Husbands, love your wives. Come on. Christ is Lord of everything. Why do we act like he's not Lord of Caesar? And I've read that. I read one Christian guy who said, well, you know, Caesar has his domain and Christ has his. Wow. I mean, all I got to do is become Caesar and I don't have to answer to Christ? Pretty good deal. No. Caesar owes his entire allegiance to Christ, just like the rest of us. So he aimed at everything.
Randy has the last question.
Okay. One more question.
Well, it's just a comment, 5 seconds. Not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before, the pastor made the remark from the front of the church that he doesn't preach on politics. I know he was talking to me, okay?
Why would he do that? Just kidding.
But I'm telling you, it's out there. He's going to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and not even venture anywhere else in the Bible. And it's out there. And that struck me 2 Sundays ago. And I will not challenge him and will not confront him because it will get pretty ugly. And I don't want that to happen. So I just kept quiet. I didn't even say anything to Karen, my wife. But it really affected me very badly.
You know,
I just want the room to know that happened to me. And I didn't like it, and there's really, I'm praying to God that something happens over that remark. Because I know he was looking at me and speaking directly to me. And he wanted the rest of the church to know that.
the whole counsel of God has now become the enemy of the gospel.
Yep.
We're in rough shape here. It's not a good situation. Speaking of that, segue, a reminder again of our old-fashioned Election Day sermon coming up on November the 3rd. The reason this is not a new idea. This is a very old idea because back in the colonial day, the state legislatures would ask for a pastor to come and preach to them and tell them what their Christian duty was. This old-fashioned Election Day sermon is just a takeoff from that. But I have a question for everybody here. Let's say the state legislatures did the same thing today. They said, look, we need a word from God. We need a pastor to come in and tell us what our moral duty is. How many of our pastors today would say, you know what? That's not our job. We're just out there saving souls. And if anybody's noticed, all this soul saving that's supposed to be going on,
Ain't happening.
it's not happening because we're losing 8 out of 10 of our kids to the very same people that are telling us, just get out there and save souls. It's disastrous out there. Brutal. All right, go ahead, Randy.
Just real quick about the Patriots meeting on Thursday night. If you can't come, tell your friends. I think this is going to be a critical open door that God has allowed us to step into. There's going to be at least, I'm hoping and praying that there'll be at least 150, 200 people.
And people that we don't normally get to touch.
Right.
They're not coming to our churches, and they're not coming to Mars, for the most part. Okay, since Randy had a comment, not a question, we'll take one more question. but I guess we've answered them all.